Hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's webinar, focusing on the fascinating region that is the Caucasus. My name's Jonny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers, and I'm delighted to see so much interest in tonight's webinar. I'm literally with hundreds of you signing up for it, so that's fantastic. So wherever you are in the world, whether you're watching this live or on YouTube, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. With a history dating back into the midst of time, it's fair to say this region, for the modern inquisitive traveller, is simply unmissable. With so much history, culture, and of course epic landscapes, it's really a place that one has to travel to. I'm personally particularly delighted to be giving a webinar about this region tonight because it's a region I've known and travelled to, goodness, for nearly 30 years, as long as I've been running Wild Frontiers. And what's particularly pleasing over that period is to see it really come to the fore as far as tourism is concerned. You know, when I first visited Georgia back in Azerbaijan and Georgia back in 1999, the country was a mess, it has to be said. And to see Georgia rise and become you know, a really proud nation with a huge amount to offer is a really wonderful thing. So it'll be great to show that off to you this evening. So as for the format, those of you that have watched these webinars before will know how this goes. I start by telling you a little bit about that history of mine with this region. I then hand over to Marc, our Director of Product and Operations, who will talk you through Azerbaijan. He'll then throw back to me and I will talk about Georgia before I throw it back to him to talk about Armenia. Marc will also talk about a few of the practicalities of traveling to the area. Once he's done that, it'll come back to Mike, who will take over to field the questions that you guys have asked and throw them back at Marc and myself, whichever is the best one of us to answer. So if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. As I say, Mike will field those and send them back to us later in the evening. And of course, as you know, we will send out an email tomorrow with a link to this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with your friends. And we'll answer whatever questions we don't get round to answering tonight. So without further ado, let me share my screen and get some, there we go. So as I say, I'm Jonny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers off the back of 3 big adventures that I did in the 90s. I rode a motorbike right the way around Africa. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I rode a horse along the Silk Road from Kashgar to the Caspian Sea. That resulted in 3 travel books, a book, Running with the Moon, about the motorcycle journey, For a Pagan Song, about the walk through India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, and Silk Dreams, Troubled Road, about the horse riding trip, which is probably the most pertinent as far as this talk is concerned, because it saw me travel from Central Asia to the Caucasus. So basically I rode my horse from Kashgar to the Caspian Sea. When I say my horse, actually there were a few horses involved. When I got to the Caspian Sea, to a place called Turkmenbashi, formerly known as Krasnovodsk, I boarded a ferry called the Dagestan, which of course is a region of the Caucasus, and went across the Caspian Sea to Baku. And that was amazing because Baku, Marc will talk more about this and I don't want to steal his thunder, but the architecture of Baku was incredible compared to what I've been seeing in Central Asia. Very kind of Austro-Hungarian, European grand architecture, like the picture you can see there. But then I took the midnight train to Georgia from Baku to Tbilisi, and what I found there was really a country in a state of turmoil, really. Of course, like a lot of the former Soviet countries, it was struggling to come to terms with independence. The center had disappeared and it was trying to stand on its own 2 feet. And it was having problems. There was no electricity, there was very little water. Obviously it was December, so it was cold and it was covered in snow. But they were also having problems with different regions. So there was the breakaway republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, both causing problems, refugees coming into the center of Tbilisi to try and find food and lodging. Talking of lodging, there was only one hotel. It was the Sheraton, which I could not afford. So I ended up in this building on the right, which was an Abkhazian refugee center. And if you go about 4 floors up and you see that blue tarpaulin covering 3 kind of areas, that was where I spent a couple of nights in that room. There was no running water, there was no electricity. But in the evening, I went out and I found a bar. And in that bar, I found a lovely gentleman. He was of Georgian descent, but he was actually American. He was a surgeon, and he'd come home for the Christmas holidays to be with his mum. And we got chatting. He invited me back to his home, introduced me to the famous Georgian hospitality, and I fell in love with the place, even though it was in a desperate state. You know, I even saw 2 corpses on the street. It was obvious that the country had a very, very big soul. And as soon as I got Wild Frontiers set up properly, I was determined to start running trips here. Now, of course, things moved on. 4 years later, we had the Rose Revolution. I'm sure some of you will remember Edward Shevardnadze. He was the one in charge of the country once the country collapsed from the Soviet Union, or once the Soviet Union collapsed, I should say. But he was ousted by the Columbia Law School educated Mikhail Saakashvili in 2003. And that was really a time of great hope for Georgia, trying to find its way in the new world. Of course, it lasted about 5 years before Putin basically set something of a trap for Saakashvili with South Ossetia. Saakashvili fell for it, went in and tried to kind of use his troops, which gave Putin the excuse he was looking for to come and invade the country. If you look at this map, you can see where Abkhazia and South Ossetia are in the north of the country. Abkhazia right up there in the northwest. South Ossetia kind of central north of Georgia. We actually had a group in an area called Svaneti, which I will talk about a little bit later on, in between, which is directly in between Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Marc and I spent a rather nervous weekend in the office communicating with our tour leader through a satellite phone, trying to keep them in front of the invading Russian army, which was not something we anticipated. We couldn't get them back to Tbilisi. We couldn't get flights from there, and we couldn't get past Gori, which was on fire and had been attacked. So we had to get them out to Armenia, which we managed to do. But that was obviously the end of Saakashvili, but it wasn't the end of Georgia. And Georgia has really boomed and blossomed in the last decade or so. The economy is good. Last year, 2025, it had a 7% growth, which most Western countries can only dream of. And to go with its extraordinary, beautiful ancient architecture or old architecture, it's been throwing up some rather exciting new buildings as well, such as a building created for a concert hall, top left, the Justice Ministry on the right, the kind of mushroom-looking building, and the Peace Bridge, designed by an Italian architect, all of which sit in Tbilisi. Just to give you another example of how things have changed, I referred to this building being the place where I had to stay on my first visit, the Abkhazian Refugee Center. This is what it looks like today. It's a Radisson Blue hotel, complete with an infinity swimming pool on the top floor. So, and this is on Rustaveli, the main street in Tbilisi. So that gives you an idea of what's gone on in this country over 20 odd years, which is fantastic to see. But what is it that people come to this region for? Well, obviously it's deep history and culture, which we will get into more when we talk about the specific countries. But for me, it's the people. I mean, to be fair, that's why I travel, period, is to meet people. Of course, one loves looking at great landscapes and seeing interesting culture and historical artifacts and things. But really, it's the people that draw you in, the people that give you stories, the people that make a place special. And there is nowhere, in my experience, quite like this region for that. This is a classic picture of the Georgians. The picture on the left I took in a region called Tusheti, which I'll talk about later. And of course, they invited us all to drink their cha-cha and dance with them to the accordion. And then Mother Georgia, which is the same as you get in Armenia, the cup of wine in one hand to greet you. But if you mess with us, we have the sword in place too. So there you are. That's the kind of brief intro. Now, before I go to Mark, I just want to give you a quick poll. So, fingers on the buzzer. Let's do this. Launch. So, if you can tell me, have you visited the Caucasus? Have you been to the Caucasus before? No, but I'm booking a visit to the Caucasus. I'm interested in visiting the Caucasus, but haven't booked yet. So basically, have you been? Are you booked and ready to go? Or are you not? You haven't booked, but you are interested to go. So let's have a look at that. I can see people still buzzing away. There are a lot of you to get through. So that's great. So we've got 18%, 19% have been to the Caucasus. Of course, that doesn't necessarily say which part of the Caucasus you've been to. I should have asked that. 13% are booked. Great. And 70% have not been, but are very interested in going. Well, that's wonderful. That's what I like to see. So hopefully we'll be able to convince you to go there later, either this year or next. So that is fantastic. So now let me pass on to Mark, where we can, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go down to the southeast to Azerbaijan, where Mark can take over. Mark.
Hi, Jonny. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. So yeah, as Jonny said, my name is Mark. I'm the Product and Operations Director, and I'm going to start off talking about the Caucasus and Azerbaijan by talking about weddings. Now, weddings should be fun and joyous affairs. But as we've seen it recently with some celebrity weddings, there are occasions when there's certain tensions that can arise, which can cause some problems. And traveling through the Caucasus can sometimes feel like trying to arrange a wedding for a slightly dysfunctional family, where certain family members won't talk to the other one, won't want to sit on the same table. And there's always a way through it, but getting the seating plan exactly right can be a little bit of a challenge. I'll try and explain. So this is a map of the region, and to try and show you the relationships between the countries. So let's start with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan and Georgia, quite friendly, happy to sit next to each other. And you can travel quite easily from Azerbaijan to Georgia. But you can't travel from Georgia overland to Azerbaijan. No one's exactly sure why. Then going from Azerbaijan to Armenia, you can see that they share quite a long border, but that border is not open, and Azerbaijan and Armenia, you cannot cross either way between the two countries. Then it gets even a little bit more complicated. If you look down to the south, you'll see Nakhchivan in red. Now, Nakhchivan is an exclave. Now, that's not a word I get to say very often. It's an exclave of Azerbaijan that cannot be reached from Armenia, cannot be reached over land from Azerbaijan. You can only get there on a domestic flight from Baku in Azerbaijan to get there. And then you've got the region in green, Nagorno-Karabakh, which up until very recently was internationally recognized as being part of Azerbaijan, but was only accessible from Armenia. As you can see, it's a little bit complicated. Jonny's already spoken to you a little bit about Georgia, with South Ossetia and Abkhazia as breakaway regions, technically part of Georgia, but you can't access them from Georgia. You can only access them from Russia. And then with Armenia, friends with Georgia, not particularly friendly with Azerbaijan, and it's got quite a long border with Turkey, but there is no open border between Armenia and Turkey, dating back to the First World War and claims of the Armenian genocide. So it's a rather complicated region, but the good news is that things are improving. When I went to the region 20 years ago for the first time, the border between Georgia and Russia was closed. It's now open. The Nagorno-Karabakh region, as of last year, is now in a much more peaceful state, thanks to FIFA Peace Prize winner Donald Trump, who's negotiated a peace treaty between the two countries. And even fresh off the press for this year, which is actually symbolically groundbreaking, Turkish Airlines are starting flights to Armenia this year, and there's hopes that the border will open between those two countries in time. So it's really a whole region to watch, and it's changing a lot. But if that all sounds really confusing, don't worry about it at all. We know the region like the back of our hand, and whether you want to arrange a private trip or whether you're going to take one of our group tours, which takes in all three of the regions, all three countries, on our 15-day across the Caucasus trip, we know exactly which borders are open and how you can get through them. So broadly, we're going to follow the routing of this trip from Azerbaijan into Georgia and into Armenia. So starting with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is very much probably the least well known of the three Caucasus countries, and probably the one with the most Asian feel to it. I think in recent years, Azerbaijan, especially its capital Baku, have become a little bit better known, perhaps through the Grand Prix, the F1, as well as some James Bond films, which was partly set there. But it's worth noting that Baku especially has an importance that goes way beyond any Ian Fleming novel. If you think about the location of Baku, it sits with Russia and what was the Russian Empire immediately to the north, and Iran and what was the Persian Empire immediately to the south. But it sat on the Caspian Sea. Now, at the end of the 19th century, 50% of the world's known oil reserves were in the Caspian Sea, which made Baku an incredibly important strategic location during the First World War. There was a huge battle there between the Ottomans and British-led forces. It's a battle which isn't particularly well known, but over 30,000 people died there, and it's a story which is fascinating and is told in a book by Peter Hopkirk called On Secret Service East of Constantinople, and I thoroughly recommend that book to anyone who's interested in the history of the region to really try and understand its importance. Today, Baku is a really fascinating city. You've got an old city, most of which is UNESCO World Heritage Site, with its fortified walls, with a 15th century Shirvanshah palace. And then you've got an iconic building, which is known as the Maiden's Tower. Now, there's an interesting story behind the Maiden's Tower that's the part of legends and poetry. They say there was a king in the region, and he had a daughter, and he wanted his daughter to marry a man, but the daughter didn't want to marry him. So she did a deal with her dad. She said, all right, I'll marry him, but please, you need to build me a tower. So he built her a tower. She said, well, a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And eventually he built this tower. She climbed up to the top and committed suicide to avoid marrying the man that she didn't want to marry. So that's a real legend of the region. It's an iconic symbol of the city. And then in the old city, you've got some beautiful old buildings which have been converted into cafes and restaurants. You've got some beautiful Ottoman style buildings, and as Jonny saw when he came over back in the 90s, you've got some other buildings which have got more of a European feel to it, whether influenced by Austro-Hungary or as the Dom Soviet building in the bottom right, influenced by Russia. So a really interesting mishmash of architectural styles going right the way up to present day, where I think probably taking a leaf out of Dubai's book, there's some stunning modern architecture which provides this fascinating contrast. These are the flame towers of the Fairmont Hotel and the Haydar Aliyev Cultural Centre, both of which are highly acclaimed architectural feats of engineering. And then in and around Baku, there's some really weird and wonderful sites. You've got, I have to say, we do not sell Azerbaijan as a beach holiday, and this is obviously one of the reasons why. But yes, you do have some beaches with some rather interesting views of some of the oil rigs. And then just north of Baku, you've got a place called the Absheron Peninsula. And this is where, on top of some gas vents, you've got these old Zoroastrian temples. And it's a good reminder that although today this is Azerbaijan, this used to be part of the greater Persian Empire. And obviously Zoroastrianism was a major religion for the Persians. And then just to the south of Baku, you've got another UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is a place called Kobustan, where there are some stunning rock engravings going back 6,000 years. And then as you start to travel west into the interior, you've got the Caucasus Mountains to your right, to the north as you travel inwards. And there's some beautiful little places that we'll come across. There's Lahuj, which is famous for its coppersmiths. And then as you get even further into the country, you come across a really important crossroads city called Sheki, which was an important stop on the Silk Road. And here you'll find some caravanserais, and you'll also find a UNESCO Khan's Palace, which, as you can see, is really impressive from the outside, but I'd say even more impressive once you get inside. So again, there's some really interesting and surprising sights. And nearby, you've got the beautiful village of Kish, which is home to an Armenian church. It's a really good reminder of the links between these two rival countries are actually maybe a little bit closer than they sometimes care to remember. And it's a really nice place for souvenir shopping, for wandering around, and for sampling some of the Azeri meals. And from here, you're only about an hour away from the Georgian border. So from here, I will hand back to Jonny to take you into Georgia.
Great, thank you, Mark. I will share my screen again and carry on. So, Georgia, I'm going to start with a saying which I've always enjoyed from the Georgians. At the beginning of time, when God was giving out land to the various nations of the world, the Georgians were too busy drinking to attend. Arriving late, God was angry and asked them why they had dishonored him so. There was now no land left to give them. But the Georgians replied that far from dishonoring God, they were late simply because they were drinking to his health and his honor, and this had taken quite some time. God was pleased by their answer and so gave them the tiny bit of land he was keeping for himself. Georgia is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever traveled to. The Caucasus mountains are high and wild, and it's just a stunning place to visit. It's relatively small. It's about the same size as Ireland, or half the size of Georgia in America, and it has a population of about 4.5 million people and is roughly a 4.5-hour flight from the UK. So it's accessible, it's beautiful, and it's easy to kind of get around. So, talking about the history, that dates back just about as far as you can go into biblical times. It's believed that it was founded by Noah's great-great-great-grandson, Cathlos, while Armenia next door was founded by his brother Haik. Jason and the Argonauts came from Greece, along with such legends as Hercules and Orpheus, to claim the Golden Fleece in modern-day Poti, which in ancient times was known as Colchis, which was very famous for its gold. And the legend of the Golden Fleece does actually have a semblance of truth. What they would use the fleeces in the river to sieve for gold. So rather than using a metal sieve, which they didn't have, they would take the fleece, put it in the river, let the sand and stuff go over it, and the gold would stick to the wool, which they could then extricate. It is also the second place in the world to become officially Christian. Back in the 4th century, Marian, the king of Colchis, was converted to Christianity by Nina, a slave girl from Cappadocia, as I say, making it the second country in the world after Armenia to become officially Christian. And of course, the Silk Road, as Mark just mentioned there, it was on one of the main routes coming down from Iran and up through what is now Azerbaijan into Georgia and on to Turkey and Istanbul, Constantinople, and of course on to Venice. And routes would come over the Caspian Sea as well. And there's lots of legacy of the Silk Road in Georgia today. Following on from that, the Russians really started to get involved at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, and the Russians actually annexed Georgia in 1801. If you like good books on regions, I would very much say get hold of Mikhail Lermontov's Hero of Our Time, one of my favorite Russian books. It tells of the 26-year-olds. He was a kind of poet and writer, tells of his stories while he was stationed down there in the army. Sadly, he died in a duel, age 26. But it's a fascinating book to read on that particular region. Of course, that takes in the greater Caucasus. We're not just talking about Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. We're also talking about the regions to the north, such as Chechnya, Dagestan, North Ossetia, etc. Ingushetia as well. But what really makes this region so fascinating is, of course, where it sits on the borderlands between Asia and Europe, where Christianity meets Islam, where Arab and Persian culture meet Turkish and European ways. Over the centuries, the Arabs, the Turks, the Persians, the Crusaders, the Mughals, you name it, have all passed this way. In fact, Tbilisi has been sacked 27 times, almost 28 in 2008, but Putin stopped short and didn't go into the city. So let's talk about Tbilisi, because that is the capital. Tbili means warm water. That's how it gets its name. And it has 30 sulfur baths in the city. And you can go and try them out. You get a massage and go and have a sulfur bath, which is quite good fun. And it's a place of contrast, of mosques and synagogues and churches, representing the kind of cultural diversity of the city and the cultural and the country in general. You will see these scattered around the city as you go around. And of course, standing above you, right on the hilltop above the city, is Mother Georgia, sorry, who I explained at the beginning, will greet you with the glass of wine, but chop your head off should you mess with them. It's Fitzroy MacLean. Any of you remember him? He was a kind of British diplomat, soldier in the 1930s, spent a lot of time in Moscow during the show trials, actually, Stalin's show trials, but he also got down to the Caucasus quite a lot. He loved the area, and he described Tbilisi as a place where jutting verandas hung like swallows' nests from the hillside homes, which I thought was rather nice. The country's kind of ancient hero is David the Builder, which is not probably the most romantic name of any great hero, but he was a hero. He drove out the Seljuk Turks in the end of the 11th century, beginning of the 12th century, and started what was then Georgia's golden age to promote Christian culture. And he united the whole of the Caucasus region, and as the name suggests, built many churches. You will find some of those churches today in Armenia, as Marc showed, also in Azerbaijan, as Marc showed, also in eastern Turkey, and of course in the northern Caucasus region. It has some wonderful museums where you will find a lot of the gold that came from Colchis, or now Poti. There is a wonderful opera house. I believe Georgia is the only country that has a centenarian choir. And it's a wonderful place today. I mean, as I say, when I went there in 1999, and I've been back a few times, you wouldn't have found any sort of nightlife at all. There was no electricity, there was very little food. And as I say, it was a fairly desperate place. Now, couldn't be more different. It's a vibrant, wonderful old city with great restaurants, bars, etc., and a very good kind of, fun nightlife and place to enjoy. There's very good hotels. The Marriott Courtyard is one of the smarter ones, but there are lots of lovely boutique hotels now in Tbilisi. Now, most people will be arriving into Tbilisi, unless you're on the across the Caucasus trip, of course, which Marc just showed you, where you'll be coming in from either Armenia or Azerbaijan. You will almost certainly land into Tbilisi. So this will be your first stop, and it's a great place to hang out and spend a little bit of time. But once you have spent your time in Tbilisi, you're going to move on. And the first place you're probably going to come to is Muxfeta. It's only 45 minutes from the Georgian capital. It's at the confluence of the Makvari and Agravi rivers. And it's on the kind of open at the center of the place where the Georgian military highway starts that leads you up to river. But what it's really famous for is its cathedral, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is where Georgian Christianity really started. Legend has it that in the 4th century AD, part of Jesus's crucifixion robe was brought here, whereupon the queen clutched it so tightly she died and had to be buried with it. From the burial place, a cedar sprouted, and from that wood, the first church was built. It's a beautiful church in the valley where the little kind of town is, but on the hill above there is another beautiful church which forms part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site called the Jabari Monastery. And this is where we try and go on a Sunday. So if one arrives into Tbilisi, you're on a Friday or Saturday, you can come up here, it's a short distance away, and see the church service. The Orthodox Georgian services are not like your typical kind of British Protestant service where you're all there at 11 o'clock, you stay there until 12 or whatever it is, however long the service is, and off you go again. These services last for 5 or 6 hours and you just come and go as you please. So they're very happy to have us come in. As you can see here, ladies wear a kind of veil over their head. But apart from that, they're very happy to have you come in, and you can really see the cultural side of what is a very, very important part of Georgian life. From here, we head north up the Georgian military highway, which is into the Caucasus. And this is where Georgia really starts to become stunningly beautiful. We travel up the Georgian military highway. You're bound to come across a few goats being driven up the road. That'll slow you down for a bit, but then and past the Ananuri church complex, where we'll go and have a look around. And in the summer you might like to have a swim. It does get quite warm in the middle of the summer, so actually this is a very nice little stopping off point before you get to Kazbegi, or the new name of the place called Stepan's Minda. This is famous for its incredible Gregory Trinity Church that sits on top of the hill, and you'll have seen many photographs of this particular church because it's backdropped by the wonderful Mount Kazbegi. Just again to show you the changes that have taken place in the time that Wild Frontiers has been doing Georgia. This was my first group that I took there in 2004, so 22 years ago. That's my father at the end of the table, if you can recognize us, and my mum on his right. And there were no hotels in the town, so we stayed in a homestay with a lovely woman called Nunu. Her husband had died. She was a widow, but she had 2 children who we had to kick out of their rooms, not on my doing, but she insisted, so that we could have beds for the night. There was one loo in the garden that we had to use. But as you can see, in classic Georgian hospitality style, she produced the most fantastic meal for us on a couple of nights. Wonderful woman. We had an absolutely fantastic time. However, now you can stay here or similar hotels. There are a few hotels here now. This is called the Rooms Hotel, and it's really like Soho House in the Caucasus. It was an old Soviet sanatorium. When I first went there, there was nothing. You know, when my group was there, it was just a rundown old place, derelict. They've turned it into this, and this is your view from the terrace there, looking up towards the Gregory Trinity Church and Mount Kazbegi, which is 5,400 meters high. So beautiful, beautiful location. We can walk. We do a nice hike up to the church itself. Takes about 2 hours. If you don't want to walk, you don't have to. You can now take a vehicle to get you up there, but we take a route that of course avoids the vehicles and gets you up to the top, which is lovely, and spend some time up there with the incredible views of the valley below and Kazbegi up towards you. So from here, we drop back down again, down the military highway and onto Gori. Now, Gori got quite badly beaten up in 2008 by the Russian invasion, and that was the town that kind of split the road, which meant we couldn't get our own group back to Tbilisi. We had to go via Armenia. But besides this rather old and somewhat dilapidated fort, there isn't a great deal to do or see in in Gori, except that it is the birthplace of this man, Joseph Dugashvili, better known as Mr. Stalin. So he came from here, and there is a very good museum about Stalin. Now, when I first went to this museum, there was an old babushka with a peroxide blonde hair in her late 60s, 70s, I should say, who just extolled the virtues of Stalin. He was the greatest thing since sliced bread, as far as she was concerned. Now we have slightly younger guides, and they have a slightly more balanced opinion of Stalin and his particular time in office. When again, going back to when I first was there, this was in the main center of the town, big statue of Stalin, that's gone. And there is just one smaller statue of him besides the museum, which has a part of his home where he was born. One of the really interesting things you can do is visit this. It's the carriage on which Stalin went to the 1945 Yalta conference to meet Roosevelt and Churchill. You can go inside it, you can see everything, where he would have slept, his bathroom, his writing desk, etc. It's really quite fascinating. From here, a little way out of town, is one of the first troglodyte cave towns. This is called Uplasteke. It's, as I say, just a little way out of town. Fascinating place. And a little bit further down towards the Armenian border, you get to Vardzia. These were built in the 8th to the 12th centuries. I say built, excavated is a better way of describing it, by the Christians to avoid persecution by the Ottoman Turks. And particularly the Vardzia one is absolutely incredible. It's 13 stories. These caves go 13 stories deep. And it's vast, over 3,000 dwellings here. And to wander around and see that is really quite something. From here, we head on down to carrying on east to the Kertevezi fortress, which was originally built, well, the original of it is the 2nd century AD, but was interestingly sacked by the Mughals in the 13th century. And then the Galati Monastery, which is a 13th century, one of the other UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Georgia. From here, we're going to go north now into that region that I told you about between South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which is called Svaneti. Now, again, going back 20 years, Svaneti wasn't really open to tourism. It took some time. It's very culturally independent. It's some of the highest villages in Europe. It's utterly beautiful. On our 15-day Georgia Explorer, which I will show you a map of shortly, we go up here and there's some wonderful day walks. They have the famous defensive towers, which you also get in Tusheti, which I'll show. This is where everyone would gather in times of attack. But as you can see, beautiful mountains to go walking in, which all form part of the newly created Trans-Caucasian Trail. Other places in the region to the kind of west of Tbilisi are Aklasteke, which is 10th to 14th century Ottoman fortified town, the port city of Batumi, the Kaskai Pillar, famous for its hermitage on the top, and Kertezi, which is where the Galati Monastery is. In the other direction from Tbilisi, you have the 6th century David Garaja Monastery, another UNESCO World Heritage Site. You have the wine region of Kaheti, and you have the beautiful region of Tusheti, which is where we now do our walking trip up into the mountains there, where again, you're kind of on the borders of Dagestan and Chechnya, and you have these amazing fortified towers. In fact, you can sleep in them. I slept in a fortified tower once. In fact, I think I was about the first person to ever sleep in that particular tower as a guest house, which was quite fun. You don't want to go to the loo in the middle of the night, though. You've got to walk all the way down. So, Georgia, just quickly to give you a run of our actual trips. Georgia Myths and Mountains. This is our kind of signature trip, if you like, 9 days. We run 19 departures of this through the year. So from Tbilisi, you'll go to the wine region, you'll go up to Kazbegi, you'll go across through Gori to Vardzia. You'll see a lot of what I've just described in this talk. If you want to do the whole thing, which I highly recommend, you will do the Georgian Explorer, which is 15 days and includes Svaneti and that whole region and the Black Sea coast. And if you prefer to do a bit of exercise on your trips, or a lot more exercise, you could do the walking tour, which is up in the Tusheti region, which is a 10-day trip, which we're running 3 times this year. So they're all great trips. Oh, and the photograph I took there on the right, that is a photograph of a group of local people inviting us to join them with their cha-cha in Tusheti. Just quickly to finish off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the food, which is fantastic. It is great for vegetarians, it's great for vegans, it's absolutely brilliant for meat eaters. There are all sorts of delicious salads and vegetables and cheeses on offer, but also, of course, great, the famous cheese bread, khachapuri, which is utterly delicious. I do advise anybody going to Georgia to diet for a bit before you go, because you will put on a few pounds. Unless, of course, you're doing the Tusheti walking trip, in which case you'll be fine. Just delicious, delicious food. One of the absolute highlights of going to this region. The wine, of course, is another great asset going to Georgia. In fact, according to Hugh Johnson, the wine journalist, Georgia has a pretty strong claim to be the birthplace of wine, with viniculture, evidence of viniculture dating back 7,000 years. This particular winery is called Kazmaruli. You can go there. It was actually opened in 1836, which is the same year Anne Boleyn got her head chopped off by Henry VIII. Back here in England. So that takes you back. You could see in that last picture, they've actually modernized a lot of the winemaking now, and it's produced on scale, en masse, and you can buy it in a lot of places. We can buy it in the UK and Waitrose and various other places. But if you want to see how it is traditionally made, there's still a lot of that to see as well. And we go to a place where you will see the traditional making, which is in these big clay vats underground, and we'll get to sample them and of course the cha-cha. And in fact, there's one new experience which we offer, which you can actually go and take part in the grape harvest and learn how to make chachela, which is the famous walnuts covered in the extract of the wine making process, which are delicious as well. But above all, this is what you will take home from your trip to Georgia. This is the classic lunch, dinner with a family, experiencing their wonderful food, wine, and hospitality and friendship. And that's really what travel should be all about. So I hope I've tantalized you enough to want to go to Georgia. As I say, people often ask me, what's my favorite country? I say, I can't have one, I've got to have five, and Georgia is in that top five. I love it. So there we go. That's Georgia. I'm going to stop sharing now and invite Marc to come back and talk about Armenia.
Thank you, Jonny. And yeah, with Armenia, what you'll find, oh, I just need to move on a slide. There we go. Armenia. So Armenia can be visited. A lot of people go there as a standalone if you're going on a private tailor-made trip, but most people, I think, visit Armenia as part of a multi-country trip. So either as part of the 3-country 15-day across the Caucasus trip, or you can visit it as part of a 12-day Georgia and Armenia heartland of the Caucasus trip, just to see the variety, which is really nice. One of the things that I find interesting is Armenia's only got a population of 3 million, but it's got a diaspora of over 10 million, which means that even if you think you don't know any Armenians, you probably do. Here are a few of the more famous people with Armenian heritage, which I know surprised Jonny when I showed him this list. He didn't realize that Cher had Armenian heritage, but yes, she does. So you probably won't meet any of these characters when you are there, but you will meet lots of Armenians who will make you very welcome. Armenian itself is an Indo-European language, but it doesn't have any link with any close link with any living language, and it has its own unique script. And as Jonny was saying, it is the oldest Christian country in the world, dating its adoption of Christianity back to 301. And yes, as a consequence, you will find lots of churches. And it's worth remembering that the Armenians are master architects. Many of you will have been to Istanbul. You will have seen the Hagia Sophia. That was built by Armenian master architects. And even if you're not really big into church architecture, which I have to admit I'm not huge on church architecture, you'll be blown away by what you see in Armenia, partly because of the pre-Romanesque styling, but also because of the location. Here's just a selection of some of the places that you can see. This is Khoverap, in the shadow of Mount Ararat, which is a real symbol for Armenia, but interestingly is actually just over the border in Turkey. This is Noravank, in a deep canyon overlooking the Ganishik River. Then you've got Haghartsin, which is deep in the Dilijan National Park. And then you've got Tatev in the south, which is only accessible via a cable car, which is one of the world's longest cable cars at 5 kilometers. So again, really amazing locations just to try and enjoy. But again, it's not just about churches with Armenia. There's quite a lot of variety. You've got beautiful scenery. This is the Debed Canyon, which you'll drive through if coming from Georgia. This is a high altitude lake called Lake Sevan, which sits at 1900 meters. And then you've got places which hark back to its place on the Silk Road. So this is a caravanserai, the Selim caravanserai, dating back to the 14th century. And then you've got these enigmatic places. This is a place called Karahunj, also known as the Armenian Stonehenge, which they think was a lunar calendar. And then you've got some cave cities, not as extensive as what you'll find in Georgia, but you'll have fun trying to say it. This is called I can't even do it. It's Hunzaresk. It's got far too few vowels in it, but you can have lots of fun trying to pronounce that. And then as you get nearer to the capital, you'll find the Ghani Temple, which is a Greco-Roman temple dating back to 100. This, which is the backdrop behind me, this is a cathedral called Zvartnots, which was actually destroyed in an earthquake in the 9th century and not actually rediscovered until the 20th century. And then throughout the country, you've got these World Heritage intangible things which are called kachgars. Kachgar means stone cross, and they are beautiful. There's about 40,000 of them throughout the country. You'll sometimes find them in cemeteries, you'll find them in churches, you'll find them in the sides of walls, and they are really beautiful, almost Celtic in their ways with the cross, but they are really, really wonderful and very, very photogenic. And then the capital, Yerevan, is very, very different from Baku and Tbilisi and provides a really nice contrast. And as you can even just see here from this shot, it's got much more of a Soviet feel to it. And I think Armenia would claim to have a closer ties with Russia than either of the other two countries. And there's some really interesting sites in Yerevan itself. One of my favorite is called the Matinadaran. This is a book depository which has 100,000 books, including some absolutely priceless medieval manuscripts. The presentation is world class. It's one of the most amazing places that I've ever been to. So that's a really nice highlight. But on a more somber note, you will also find a museum dedicated to the Armenian genocide of the First World War. And this is something which you will hear talked about. It's something which does help craft the modern day Armenian identity, and it is a source of tension, hopefully easing, between Armenia and its neighbour Turkey. Also in the capital, if you're there over the weekend, which we often are, you'll find a flea market called the Vernissage, which is great for buying carpets, buying souvenirs. And I do have to mention the food. It may not have the same reputation as Georgian food, but it is fantastic nevertheless. You've got some beautiful, really thin bread called lavash, and you have got the Armenian equivalent of what Jonny was raving about in Georgia, full of walnuts and full of great molasses, which is really great. But it's worth remembering that Armenia today is smaller than the greater Armenia that once existed. And one of the most important Armenian cities was a place called Ani. About 1,000 years ago, it was considered one of the largest cities in the world. It sat on the Silk Road. Marco Polo was said to have crossed it, but today it sits just over the border in eastern Turkey. So if you look here, this is one of the famous sites in Ani. The river that you see, that is actually the border between Turkey and Armenia. And as I mentioned, you cannot cross between the two. So if you want to see what was part of Greater Armenia, as well as some iconic sites like the Ishak Pasha Palace, which sits just on the other side of Mount Ararat, you're going to have to go to Turkey. And this is a wonderful trip that we're finding has proved really popular over the last couple of years, visiting parts of what was Greater Armenia, or even parts of Greater Georgia, as part of the eastern borderlands of Turkey. So that's a really nice trip. But if you do want to combine Caucasus with Turkey and see some of these sites, you can do that as well. But you'd have to do that as part of our 48-day Great Silk Road adventure, which will take you all the way over from Xi'an with the Terracotta Army in China, right the way through Central Asia with places like Samarkand, through the Caucasus and into Turkey. This year's trip, we only run once a year. This year's trip is sold out. Next year's trip has a few places left. So if that appeals, I would suggest booking that quickly. On to a few practicalities. As to when the best time to visit the Caucasus is, as you may expect, the most popular times are spring and autumn, which are great times. They are a bit busier, but that's where you will find most of the departures. However, if you do want to go and do some of the walking that Jonny was talking about in the Tusheti region, then you'll definitely need to go, and you'll want to go in the height of summer, because some of the roads don't open until quite late in the season. And really interestingly, we're finding as part of our off-peak collection, more and more people are choosing to explore the region at a quieter time. They're going in the winter time, which you can definitely do. And you'll get to see some of the beautiful Christmas markets that exist in Tbilisi. And it's a really interesting time that allows you to visit the region with very, very few other visitors. With regards to getting there, if you're coming from the UK, British Airways, they've got a few flights a week in the season. But being honest, the timings are not necessarily the best, because you arrive at about 6:30 in the morning. So we actually find that most people end up flying with Turkish or with Lufthansa. And definitely if you wanted to combine different regions, those are the airlines that you will probably find yourself using. And obviously if you're coming from further afield, coming from the States or coming from Australia, then they can offer good options as well. Jonny spoke about the accommodation, and it's getting better and better every year. On our group trips, we use really nice, comfortable, characterful accommodation. And yes, as Jonny said, if you're traveling tailor-made, you can choose to stay in places like the Rooms Hotel up in Stephansminda, or a place like this in the bottom. This is the Stamba Hotel, which is this beautiful design hotel which opened a few years ago in Tbilisi, which has been converted from a 1950s publishing house. So again, some really interesting options coming into play every single year. Access is relatively easy. Azerbaijan, you need an e-visa, typically takes about 3 days to come through, and is very easy to apply for. Georgia, you don't need a visa for the vast majority of countries don't need a visa for, but they've started something this year, which isn't an issue, but you do just need to have handy proof of travel insurance. It can be in English, doesn't have to be in Georgian, but that's fine. You'll just need to show that on arrival. That's all you need for Georgia. And Armenia, they don't ask for anything, no visa, no proof of insurance needing to be shown, very easy to access. And with regards to cultural sensitivities, responsible travel, obviously as a B Corp company, this is something that's very important for us. And they're interesting. They're quite liberal countries. So you will find people dressed very, in a very modern ways, but they do have this conservative side when it comes to religion. So as Jonny mentioned, when you're entering churches, especially in Georgia and Armenia, women do need to cover their heads. And for men, when entering churches, please no short shorts. To be honest, actually, that should just be a rule wherever, not just in Georgia and Armenia, just short shorts anywhere, ever. But there's not really much else to take into consideration. From our point of view, we try and get away from just the cities and the towns, take people up into more rural areas to help spread, the money that we bring into the region. And one of the things that we started about 3 years ago through our Wild Frontiers Foundation is in the wine region. We have co-funded a kiln which is used in therapy for children with special needs. So they make the clay, they create these pots, and they're sold in a local shop, and that helps create some additional funds. So that's something that the foundation is very happy to support. And as part of every booking with us, a donation gets made towards the foundation. So that is it from me. I will stop sharing and hand you back to... I have one more slide. Sorry, I forgot about this. I have to talk about our amazing guides and leaders. I was out there in 2023 doing some training, and they are amazing. They are enthusiastic. They've got lots of energy, and they are really proud, and they won't just guide you around. They will be your hosts, and they will genuinely see you as guests in their region, in their countries, and you're guaranteed to have an amazing time with them. So I just wanted to mention that. Jonny.
Yeah, some of the best guides we have, aren't they? Absolutely fantastic. Just very quickly then, before we go to Q&A, just a quick reminder of Wild Frontiers generally. Our group tours, maximum group size is 12, which of course is very important. We use characterful and comfortable accommodation and transport. off the beaten track experiences, and they're full board, so almost all meals are included. On a tailor-made level, of course, we have a full team of specialists to design your trip with expert knowledge of their areas. And as Marc just mentioned, we have the Wild Frontiers Foundation, where £5 from every trip fee goes towards the foundation. And of course, we are atoll protected. So, Mike, shall I stop sharing and we can all come on and you can, throw some questions at us if we've had any.
Right. Yes, thank you so much, Jonny and Marc, for a wonderful virtual trip through the Caucasus. We've had a few questions. There is just about time to ask a couple more if you want to use the Q&A button in the bottom. But I'll start with Caroline and Graham. Marc, perhaps referring to your awkward wedding scenario. They're asking, is it possible to cross overland between Georgia and Turkey?
Yes, Georgia and Turkey, there's no problem. So from Jonny showed in one of his slides, there's a place called Batumi, which is on the Black Sea. There is a road there which will take you to the Turkish border in about an hour and a half. And then from there, you can either come down to visit Ani, which was the place I was talking about in Armenia, or you can carry along the Black Sea coast, which will take you onto the tea-growing region of Turkey and Trabzon.
Of course, that's on our Great Silk Road adventure. You will do that ferry border crossing.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Pat is asking what the policy or pricing is for solo travelers on our group tours.
I'll take that one. So we don't have any mandatory single supplements. So if you would prefer not to pay a single supplement, then we will room you with someone of the same sex. And if you do want to pay a single supplement, no problem, you can pay a single supplement. So it's not an obligatory thing. It's completely your choice.
Yeah.
Thank you. A question, anonymous question. What elevation is the hiking trip? What's the maximum elevation on that?
So you go over the pass that takes you into Tasheti, which I think is just under 3,000 meters. The most you're going to get up to is kind of 3.5, something like that. Would that be right, Marc?
Yeah, I actually think most of it is on the lower slopes of Tasheti. Yeah. So it may be a little bit lower than that. You're not going up, none of it is technical. You're not doing any of the high mountaineering, none of the scenery behind you. So yeah, it's something to be mindful about, but we've never had any real issues with it, people suffering from altitude.
And it's stunning. It really is one of my favorite parts of the country. It's utterly beautiful.
Thank you. Hiligonda is asking about in Tbilisi, is there a chance to visit the Chronicles of Georgia?
Oh, Marc?
Let's throw that one at Marc.
I'm gonna say yes, there is, but if I'll be lying if I say I know exactly what that is. But if that is a question, we can direct that towards Katie or Kenny or one of our other travel consultants who could definitely answer that with a little bit more confidence than I have.
If it's in Tbilisi, you'll be able to see it. That's the bottom line.
Someone's given us a map reference. That's great. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Brilliant. I think that's it for questions. Thanks so much for that.
Great. Well, once again, just a big thank you to everybody for watching. Marc, thank you. Mike, thank you. And keep an eye on things because we'll be back with another webinar in the not too distant future. So wishing you all a very pleasant day, evening, morning, wherever you are, whatever you're up to. And thank you so much for watching. Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye-bye.